Hello and welcome to this episode of The Historical Fencer. With us today we have none other than the rascal Scott Hellroth. Say hi.
Hi guys, thanks.
Young Hannibal Lecter.
All right, shut up for 2 seconds and I'll play the intro.
You are here on a matter of honor. I am here to assure you settle it honorably.
Junkerte Lehrer, Gottlieb haben, Frauen ja Ehren, so wächst
I see you handle your weapon well.
I have been known to keep my tip up.
Morning.
Why don't you make it up like a couple of good fellows?
Don't expect these
You ask for me tomorrow, and you shall find me a grave man.
You ready, gentlemen?
We did a recording of an episode a couple of months back and I shot you with one of those foam guns during the introduction.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I botched the entire episode.
Anders had what we call a boomer moment.
But today we're back with a vengeance with a very good friend of ours, Scott Hellroth.
Hi guys, the original trio is here.
The original trio. But you don't live in Gothenburg anymore. You've failed us.
Yeah, I know. For some reason, like living in North Sweden, I figured I'd just move even further north.
Yes.
So, if you come and visit me, prepare for -20 and, well, not quite snow bears.
Yeah, okay, so
north of the wall. Scott will greet us on a reindeer.
Way north of the wall.
Yeah, Uppsala. Well, it's called up.
Yeah, that's the land I live is called. It's called upland. Yeah. It can't get further north.
Like you're only 1/3 up in Sweden, to be honest. But okay, yeah, live the fantasy, Scott. It's better for you.
Okay, I live in the last civilized stronghold before the true wildness begins, where Axel's from.
That is true. Be careful.
Yeah,
dude. If you live in a place where people have snow scooters, you're in the north.
They do that in Uppsala?
Yes.
I thought it were only academics living in Uppsala.
No, you got just 10 minutes outside. You have your Swedish hicks.
Yeah, the academics they live in the intellectual ghetto, where they have scarves and drink espresso. Yeah. And then you move outside of it and they start like wolves are howling and these kids on snowmobiles are riding around shooting at you with BB guns and playing techno music.
I actually have my experience of people from Uppsala is that they're very academic in their sense of humor. Meaning that they all studied at the university and they have these sort of boring jokes and songs and everything. Everything just becomes very introverted.
You mean nerds?
Yeah, but like academic nerds.
Oh, the ones that've gone through the student course and they know all that.
Yeah, and they're 50 and they're still singing the same songs and telling the same jokes.
Do you know? I think it's almost like people in Stockholm are considered to be very rude. And the ones who are very rude are the ones who moved into Stockholm and trying to uphold the persona of being a real Stockholmer. So they try to hide their own, rural accent, and they try to be as rude as possible as a way to fit in. I think maybe the Uppsalensis people are kind of the same way. Like the ones you meet who are like that, they're all from Hickville, Big Träsk somewhere, and they're just trying really hard. Whereas the real Uppsala people are, the kind of hicks that Scott is talking about.
Yeah,
it's my theory.
So, Axel, when was the first time you met Scott?
Well, I had a vision when I was very young of the Joker card. It was actually on the first time I went to train with GHFS in 2006. And I just moved to Gothenburg and I was 21 years old. And I had been training with ARMA, the Association for Renaissance Martial Arts, for like 2 years before that. And because of that, I was convinced that I belong to the best martial art HEMA organization. I don't know if we call it HEMA then, but the best historical fencing organization in the world. The only one who sparred really, really well and really, really good. And everyone else was, kind of like meh. Especially GHFS, because you sparred with Shinais, which was like a huge divide. This was like Protestant Catholic kind of thing back in those days.
Which we didn't know anything about.
No, but we knew. So when I came there, I came with some sort of like sense of, I'm going to show these guys what it's about. And then Anders like knocked me in the head 5 times. And I changed it. But before that, I was on the tram. And when I got to the tram station, where I was supposed to get off, I noticed that there were 3 other guys with like Shinais in their back. And 2 of them was Gunnar and Christian Heinonen, the smith. and the third one was this guy. So I asked them, like, are you going to fence? And they looked at me kind of like, yeah, we have swords on our backs. But it was so rare. Like in 2006, you basically knew every fencer in the world by name.
Yeah.
So like meeting people with swords on their back at the tram. Yeah. Okay, I'm not saying that's normal these days, but it was like, it was a thing. So we walked up with them three, and we came to the old training hall, International English School in the basement there. Walked down, I saw a locker to my left, which I thought was really cool. This club has a locker, like they got logistics. It was a big thing, 2006, to even have your own place. So like, all right, I give them that. And then, I walked in and we were just about to start. So I joined the advanced group.
But you didn't.
And I went straight to the left to the beginners group.
Yeah, because you had trained before. We had this thing where we divided people depending on how experienced they were.
To this day, I'm the only instructor or like advanced guy who have not done the advanced test in GHFS.
Yeah. So technically, Axel's qualified as a beginner.
Proud one.
Proud one.
Best white belt in the club.
But the thing with Arma in those days, you're right, they were like the tough guys, they were like the legit guys, so to say. And like, in 2006, like, what do you remember from those days? Like, what's your clearest memory from that era?
Or 2006, you were in Dijon, Anders.
Yeah, Dijon in 2006, the first tournament, the real tournament that we held. But from the early days, Arma was a huge influence on me. But I didn't know about these divides. Like I knew that Arma and EMA in Canada had a sort of a dispute. But for me, it was just enthusiasm. I think we were just enthusiastic about stuff. So we were like, okay, so let's try Shinais, see how they work. It wasn't like we didn't care if it was a Shinai. If someone handed us a sharp, we'd fence with a sharp.
Well, you were already old at that time, but I was 21 years old and shit hot, so I just had to mark territory. I think that was what it was about. Well, you were going somewhere.
No, not really. I remember it was a debate, though, in those days about the Shinai, because when you talk about steel swords, you have to have all the gear. And when you have all the gear, the question was it will become a material sport. And sort of that was one of the hesitations that I think GFHS had.
And we also didn't have any gear. And no swords.
Exactly.
Nothing to spar with, nothing to spar in. Really.
Yeah.
But you were talking about Arma in those early days, and I think in 2007 when we moved to the Nidon Wasters, and you could really start amping it up without much more gear than we had for Shinais. I mean, they struck harder than Shinais, but the fencing became much more realistic. Things really started to go in a pretty cool direction, I think. So
it was an age of discovery where like you didn't know. You didn't like it was just mystery everywhere, and you saw bits and like social media wasn't as prevalent now either. So you'd find some clip on YouTube like, hold on, these Polish guys they're actually like competing steel swords. Like we're gonna go and check it out, and then you sort of you grab some clothes together, and like that you think could pass this like protective gear, and you go down and you see what's going on, and you come back with all the boons and like wisdom that you have from that trip. So like traveling in those days in fencing, I think it just enriched so much more than it does today, I think.
So what was it that made you come into the club back then?
Oh, dude, it's that eternal question. Why do you start fencing? It's in you. It's in you from the very beginning. And I think most fencers will say that, like, oh man, I was playing with my, the kids in my street and we found some old swords in the garage and, I used to whack my sister on the head with it and like it starts from there. It's sort of, I think it's just in us.
Yeah, but you don't have a sister, so who did you fence?
All my neighbors.
But like you must have still like somehow you found out about historical fencing.
Oh, yeah. Dude, I walked past like one of these fantasy bookshops in the year 2000, and I saw Gandalf's fucking wall hanger hanging on one, in the window, and I was like, oh my god, a real sword! I must learn the way, So I went to like a flea market and found some like really crappy like €30 katana sword set. And I was like, I'm obviously the only one in the world that is interested in this. So I went out to the mountains and sort of just decided I would like train myself. I broke all 3 swords the first day and I was like, shit. And then I suppose a year later or something, I found GHFS. And then, the moment you go through the door, like, oh, I'm home. This is what I do now. This is where I am.
That's so interesting because that's exactly the experience I had on my first practice back home with Arma. I saw it, the motions.
Yeah.
of the instructor under the street light, and I'm like, oh yeah, of course, this is it.
Yeah. And walking in the first day, I saw this sort of gleaming figure of Anders Linnard, the head instructor, and I was like, oh, godlike. Not so much today. But it's like you forget that when you're really new at martial arts, you go in and you just you see the equivalent of black belts. They're like gods in your eyes.
And that quickly waned, or
totally. Yeah.
Well, the thing is that I didn't even notice you guys when you came in the first time, so I don't remember when I first noticed you. I was like, those two young guys, they're pretty obnoxious, but they're fun. There's a lot of fun hanging out with you. But you said that you remember the first time that the three of us sort of hung out.
Yeah, like the first time we shared a moment, was after the first time we did Swordfish, 2007. The first one was in Malmö, and then we hosted from 2007 and up until then. And we had just done this little event full of nerds, over 40 people in total, which was, incredible. And we pulled off all the logistics, and we did a bunch of new things. So we had everything in one hall, which was one building, which was great. People didn't have to take buses here and there. It was all these amazing things we managed to do with the first Swordfish. And we were just so happy that we pulled it off. I mean, it was really like a type of euphoria, of conquering new territory and being, doing something new. And on the way home, we were all of us three stood at the bus station waiting for the bus home with our sword bags and stuff. And Scott was just cracking us up with the most ridiculous jokes. Because you used to be a very funny guy.
Back when I was drinking, but I stopped drinking years ago.
Scott asked me if he could drink on the show. I was like, yeah, and then he pulls up a non-alcoholic beer. Like, oh my god, be careful now. But yeah,
well, that's good. If this episode is sponsored by Erdinger non-alcoholic beers.
Yeah, we always have imaginary sponsors. I think we said that Dennis sponsored our show once, and then we always had to refute. No, actually, he doesn't.
Dennis?
Yeah, I think because we talked so much positive about it.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, back to that. I think one of the things we always appreciate about you is that amazing sense of humor in the face of everything, really.
Well, thank you guys. I'm blushing.
And all the bad shit's gonna come soon.
Yeah, we're gonna tell all the stories today.
Yeah, and you have such an amazing attitude. I always felt like I really enjoyed just hanging out with you and Anders and just fence with you, because there was always fun. Fencing can always be for me it was a job for many years, but just going to the hole every day grinding and but when we were together, there was always this kind of positive, happy-go-lucky atmosphere, and the bantering. It's been one of the absolute most enjoyable things about historical fencing at all.
Yeah.
Dude, if you're a good crew and the chemistry right, you can be unconquerable in what you do. And I'd say that, so for many years, GHFS was this power horse in fencing, and obviously, known for we're the tournament guys, basically. That's what, one of the big contributions we had. We'll get into that as we go through this podcast. But my role in all of that, I suppose, would be the muse, maybe. That's how I'd like to describe myself.
The muse?
The muse of HEMA. Fuck yeah.
Amusement.
Planting ideas in your head. And
yeah, perhaps. You've planted a few ideas, I guess. But you're onto something, because I was just about to say, before you honked your own horn, that that what I remember when I started remembering you guys, when you made a small dent in my reality, in the fabric of my reality, was when we started sitting down and talking about fencing, because that was quite unique. I'd come from a background in GHFS where we were all a small bunch of friends just having a good time and training, and you could talk and all of that. And we had an episode with Sam when he came in and he said, just raise the bar, train harder, do better. And we started doing that. And once you start doing that, as the head instructor, I quickly realized that I'm no longer just one of the guys. I'm the black belt that you talked about, that person. But that also meant that you meet a lot of characters, because things change a bit in the dynamics between people. So one thing is that some people will challenge you all the time, and they'll think that that's how they get ahead. You know, they by just if he says that, I'm just going to say the opposite because that makes me on his level, regardless if that's the case or not. And the other thing is that some people just don't talk to you about things. They stop, okay, so what is he saying? Okay, that's the gospel. What he's saying is the truth. But with you guys, I found these irreverent douchebags, rascals, that you could talk about anything. It was like the early days, the really, really early days, when it was just, having fun and you and, just hanging out. Sometimes I remember one New Year's Eve when you knocked on my door when I had a civilized company and I had to turn you away, if you remember that. But I really, really enjoyed that. And the really good thing about it is that we could talk about fencing in a way that I never could speak with anyone else. Like there were depths to that, to the ways that we talked about those things, challenging everything and coming up with new ideas and pursuing new paths. And for me, that was a real enjoyment of hanging out with you guys. But that's enough kissing your butt. So let's get on with the New Year's Eve. What were you doing? Because I had civilized company.
We had a.
I'm too drunk to remember. I was too drunk to remember that.
Oh yeah. So we were out celebrating, and I think we've been. You remember your place in Malmö? We lived in that attic apartment.
Oh yeah, proper shithole. Yeah.
And we got into town, and we were on Linnégatan.
Yeah.
And Scott, we decided that that old guy lives here. Maybe he's asleep by now. I mean, it was like right after midnight or something. But let's try. And you had like a fancy dinner party. Oh yeah, we knew that, and that's why we wanted to crash it, because it was you and your fancy media friends.
You had it wasn't. It was two friends of mine, a gay couple, which they're very sophisticated, very nice people. We had a 6-course dinner with oysters, and then with fondant. I made a fondant for the dessert. I remember this clearly, and having a bit of Remy Martin or maybe a Renault Cognac.
Well, we had like at least 12 Falcon 3.5%. We were on a roll, and unfortunately for Anders, he has the doorbell out on the street, and that's not a good idea. So we hung on that thing trying to get him out, and you giggled a little bit. You gotta admit, but your wife did not like that too much, maybe. And then some guys came by and they gave us their guitar.
Okay, so they gave you a guitar.
We acquired the guitar. I started. I don't know how to play the guitar, but eventually Anders came down and physically forced us away from his home, the man stepping out and defending the homestead kind of thing from the orc. So we left, and I was playing the guitar, and Scott was walking in the middle of Linnégatan screaming, "I am a Scotsman and I'm alive!" all the way down to Andra Långgatan, Second Long Street, where you made me go into Wanda's, the strip club, and then I made you go out again because you tried to steal weed from Hell's Angels, and we had to leave. Somewhere there the night ended.
Well, that was the life in those days. We'd fence all week, and then Axel and I would get blind fucking drunk in the weekends. And we had this thing we started doing, which we started drunk dialing people. It usually were guys in the United States, because it was daytime, and if it's 3 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday night, it's only pretty much Americans that are awake at that time. But we'd try and we'd made a sport out of it to who can we get to whose number we don't have to, and the unicorn obviously at the end of that tunnel was John Clements, which is
how many names can we mention? This is over 10 years, so this must be well, it's okay now.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing was that many years later, so we'd pretty much phone most instructors we could get hold of. But then it sort of became a badge of honor at one stage, because somebody approached me once and he was sort of a bit fobbed off that we hadn't drunk dialed him, because sort of he saw it I was not, worthy enough or on the A list to be drunk dialed. There
was a lot of Facebook. This was 2010 or 9 or something. We're like, I hope I don't get drunk dialed. And people were after every Wednesday or Friday or Saturday night or Monday or Tuesday or occasionally people would write that whoever we had drunk dialed.
Yeah, who was it that you first called?
Well, I actually remember this better than you because you were so blasted. But we decided we were going to call all the Swedish fencers, which were 9 at the time that we knew, and wish them Merry Christmas. I don't remember. It must have been close to the holidays then. And we started to acquire the numbers, but then, it became a chain, right? So we had to find the next number and then the next number. So we started singing to the Swedish fencers, and then we got hold of Matt Galle's number. And, he works at NATO, and we got his office number.
Oh, that's right.
Remember that?
Hot secretary.
That wasn't the best idea ever. And then we got Lopez's number from Matt, because Matt, thought it was kind of funny, but, he hung up pretty fast. And Scott decided to pretend to be a Chinese mafia guy, pretending that Lopez owed him money. So Scott calls up with a Chinese accent, like, you pay now. And Lopez...
He didn't flinch.
To his credit, he did not flinch. He was like, I don't know who the beep you are, but I'm having dinner with my girlfriend. You can just beep the beep off. And then we called him again. It's like, hey, it's us. And he thought that was funny. And then, number gave us number. And, it looked like... When FBI tries to map out the mafia in Sopranos, there was just drawings and names and this guy can get at that number. And on one night, somewhere we made the jump over the Atlantic over to America with the goal of reaching John Clements, because he was our hero, and it's also a controversial character, which makes it even more fun, right? And I don't think we reached him that night, but we did reach Aron Pinenberg, and I wonder if he remembers this, because Scott called him and he froze, because your mouth just goes like this, Scott can just jump into any situation and just deal with it. But Aron was such a big hero to you because he did that prize play in 2007 that was really we really liked.
Yeah, if you want to go watch a good old school HEMA fencing video, watch Aron Pinenberg's prize play 2007.
That's something
fucking epic.
That's absolutely epic. So when you got to Aron, he froze, and you were like, hello, and he was like, with this probably on his phone there playing video games. I was like, yeah, what's up? Scott hung up, redialed him, now with more bravado, and meant something like, I want to challenge you to a fight, and I want to get knocked out by you. I want to do this and this. And Aron he thought it was fun. He was just like, yeah, sure, cool. Yeah, sure, cool. And then we stopped there. But I think we reached John Clements at some other point.
We reached him at some other point. I froze then, I remember. And also we got hold of Greg Melee, and who's the other? We're trying to get somebody's number off of Greg Melee. Who was that?
Christian Tobler.
So Tobler was one of these white horses that we wanted to get hold of, and was like, okay, well, they're not going to give us his number if we're just goofing around. They figures out that we're some drunk dude. So I phoned, and he doesnn't know this. I'm confessing to you now, Greg Melee. We called you up and said we're from Wizard Publishing, and try to get Tobler's number off of you. And you're like, oh yeah, absolutely, I get it. And then we got the number that way, and then we.
He even did the research, looking up a publishing company that just got gone out of business, and found Wizard Publishing, and they made up some story about connecting the 4 guards of Lichtenau with the 4 elements and stuff, which Tobler was doing research on at the time. It's kind of cool, and then we got to Tobler, I think. And do you know what happened after that? You passed out.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because we did not get to Tobler. His answering machine was on, and then excuse me. Scott passed out and I stayed up, but I didn't want to call because you got to remember, we did all of this international calls for 8 hours on Scott's company phone.
Yeah.
So
my accountant was super happy about that.
Super happy. And 4 a.m, Tobler calls back, and Scott, he passed out. We've been drinking for 20 hours. He passes out and just snaps into character Wizard Publishing. He was so in character, and then made up some excuse about being on the golf course, something I had to call back, and I think we dropped it after that.
Yeah,
and that became a trend. The Finns started drunk dialing people. We had a good time.
Yeah. So anybody out there, please revive this tradition. Start drunk dialing.
Yeah, and Scott's number is.
All right. No, that's not the game though. You have to find it. You have to go through the maze to find all the numbers.
Yeah, that's true. Right, so you guys up for some music?
Sure.
Yeah, all right. So this is Starry End by Jane and the Boy.
Focus, I can't even control it. You know your lips are golden, baby, get me high. Touching me like lightning, keeping it exciting. You know exactly what to do to blow my mind. You're from another planet. I've never felt like this. I don't know how I ever survived without it. I'm starry outer space. Just keep painting constellations. You cover me in glitter till I'm shining bright. I never wanna leave the sky. The way you made me feel alive. I was in the dark and baby, you're the light. You're from another planet. I've never felt like this. I don't know how I ever survived without it. I'm starry-eyed. Got me upside down, spinning around you. Wanna taste the clouds, dance with them. Take a trip around your body. Boy, I love the way you got me. Starry-eyed, got me starry-eyed. Couldn't fight if I wanted. Flying to places that I never thought I could go. You're a meteor shower, falling down all over me. Yeah, you're making me glow. Couldn't fight if I wanted. Flying to places that I never thought I could go. Starry-eyed, got me starry-eyed. Yeah, got me upside down, spinning around you. Wanna taste the clouds, dance with them. Take a trip around your body. Boy, I love the way you got me. Starry-eyed, got me starry-eyed. Got me upside down, spinning around you. Wanna taste the clouds, dance with them. Take a trip around your body. Boy, I love the way you got me. Starry-eyed, got me starry-eyed. Got me upside down, spinning around you. Wanna taste the clouds, dance with them. Take a trip around your body.
Story-eyed with Jane and the Boy.
You have such a radio voice, Anders.
Thank you.
Starry-eyed. No.
Right. So we were telling stories about drunk dialing, and then one night you reached John Clements, right?
Yeah, and that's when Scott really froze and like stuttered for 2 minutes and then hung up, I think.
Oh yeah, we hung up on him.
But do you remember the other guy when we went to some pub and we ran into a bunch of Japanese business guys?
No, I don't.
Okay, so we ran
Do I want to remember this?
Well, you might, if you want to know what happened to your whole set of kitchen furniture, I can remind you because, yeah, it was that night.
Really?
Yeah, we took home a bunch of Japanese businessmen for an after party at Scott's apartment. I know it's just around this neighborhood. And we started challenging them because they were samurai, right? Had to be.
Had to be. Obviously.
Scott pulls out his Albion Viking sword. And to impress the audience, I mean, they had the ties around their head and everything. Yeah, they were all in. He starts chopping up his furniture.
Really?
Oh, really? That's what that was?
It was that night, yeah.
Oh, fuck.
He just goes to town on like chairs and tables. And I mean, it took a while. I don't know how impressed they were by, your cutting mechanic skills. But they sure thought it was an interesting situation to be dragged home to by an unknown Scotsman in a Sweden apartment where they brandish a sharp sword and demolishes his own home. That was the thing.
Yeah, shout out to those guys.
Oh my. Right. So maybe we should talk about drinking.
Well, that's the thing. It's like, you live this wild life and it's full of adventures. But in terms of a fencing career, that's always going to be this thing that, that stops you from progressing. And, that in every sport or martial arts, it starts off small. Like if you look at, like skateboarding or climbing, it starts off with this small community of anti-establishment, riffraff that, do this thing for passion. But then when the level goes higher and higher and you push it more and more, sort of, can you smoke weed until 3 in the morning and then go out and perform the next day? You can't. So then you get the next generation that sort of just sharpen themselves up a bit. And then all of a sudden you're in this situation where you have full-blown athletes with diet programs and I think it's just a natural part of progression. And me I wasn't the only person that drank in HEMA in those days. It was a very, very thirsty community back in the 2000s, and that's one of those things that I think we raised a lot of eyebrows. And it was a particular tournament in Germany.
That's right.
With Colin Richard had this world championship.
No. Worldwide Open.
Worldwide Open.
He got so much shit from trying to call it a world championship.
And yeah, exactly. You know, I think, fuck it. You know, if you want to call it World Championship, go for it, buddy. But so when we rocked up there, you know, we went to bed at 9 p.m. You know, everybody's up drinking, and they were like, "What are you doing?" We're like, "Tomorrow we shall perform." You know, with this like stoic Swedish dudes, all blonde hair, you know, just rocking up, just like some bad guys.
We showed up.
Yeah, we looked like
the uniforms with our names on the back.
Yeah, we looked like the bad guys in a Die Hard movie. Just like,
Cobra Kai.
Cobra Kai.
Sweep the leg.
Yeah. Tomorrow we shall kick ass. And yeah, and I think that was a shift. There was a shift there, you know, in sort of a new generation of fencing was kind of born in that period.
I'd like to add also for everyone that it might sound like we're saying that we changed everything in HEMA. Those were days where we actually could, because the club was so known, community was so small, and we were so successful that yeah, actually we did do that, not in all ways, obviously, but in many ways. And you know, the World Wide Open Championship in Germany was the only big tournament going on in like one out of three, G-John, that one, and Swordfish, in all of Europe, besides the Polish guys. We also went to that year. So yeah, like we actually were able to change a lot of things. That was really interesting times.
And I, if I remember correctly, we, like, how many medals did we take home?
Well, I know.
0 for me, thank you.
I took gold in longsword. You took silver. Dennis took gold in rapier. Hans took silver. And yeah, that was that.
So 4 out of how many people?
I wonder if one of our... do you remember if Nina Trollviga was there and fought in the women's tournament?
Yeah. Yeah.
She did, because she didn't travel with us, so I forgot it.
Yeah, I don't remember.
And you know also what happened that time? Matt Gallis showed up late because like he was lazy or something, or there was a world crisis that he had to solve somewhere. Who knows? And because he was Matt Gallis, they just gave him his own pool and pushed everything up 2 hours, and he just fought 10 guys back to back.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
That's HEMA royalty for you.
That's HEMA royalty.
That's pretty funny.
But so, then, like, because we're in this time period, so in the mid-2000s, and, you know, Anders, I don't know if you've talked about this in previous podcasts, but the landscape at that stage was, you know, there were no tournaments. And, you know, GHFS was a club that really pushed that concept of tournaments. And, you know, you need to know the reason and what that landscape was, you know. And, like you know, at that stage, when you've got nowhere to test your ideas, you basically have theoretical, you know, instructors on YouTube videos theorizing over this is the right interpretation, these are the right cuts, and this is how you approach it. And then another guy disagreeing on another YouTube channel, but you never, like, you know, who's right?
They didn't even post on YouTube, to be honest.
No, they just posted
forums in those days.
Forums.
Yeah, I mean,
just talk.
I remember this started because we were actually sparring a lot. I mean, and then we transitioned to tournament. Remember when they accused us of flooding the internet with sparring videos?
Yeah, it was horrible.
So walk away from the screen.
We filled up the entire internet. We took it away by just filling it with videos of us sparring.
But for us, it was a big deal. I mean, when we were traveling around and trying to just be and promote a certain, like, not new, but leveled up approach, the one you talked about with sports in general. Like, yeah, you actually have more fun if you take this a little bit more seriously. You don't have to get plastered and be tired like when you fight. You're going to enjoy this a lot if you put some more effort in. And I think we add quite a bit to that.
I mean, okay, so first of all, drinking beer and fencing, that actually goes back to the guild days of the original historical fencers.
I think it goes back to like the step days of 4000 BC.
Probably. But for me at that time as well, it was that I was trying to establish a serious martial art. That was the idea. We wanted to be like any martial art. And if you look at MMA, you don't see the fighters drinking the night before. That was at least my perception. Maybe Conor McGregor. I don't know. But, you know, you wanted to have a more professional approach to it. So we made our own jackets with our names on it. We didn't drink. We trained hard. We did all of those things. Like by comparison to other sports, we were still noobs. Like we weren't there yet. But that was the aspiration for it. And that was sort of a shift.
This is something we talked about before, but I remember that very clearly. Also because of like our success. It becomes kind of the way you talked about before with students who eat up your every word.
Yeah.
Like we were in a position where we knew where we wanted to go, and we weren't there yet. Like we knew how much we sucked, But so it was difficult to deal with both the people who said, "Oh, you're the best fencer ever." Like, I trained more when I played soccer as a teen than I do now. Like we're not there. Like, oh, what an amazing athlete. Like, I want to be, but I know I'm not. And also the people who criticized it, because when we started promoting tournaments, us and a few other like the Polish guys and so on, the criticism was, "Oh, it looks so horrible." It's like, yeah, we know. But wait and see in 5 years where we're at, and that's exactly what happened. And it was also another thing I thought was pretty funny, because someone criticized, remember Simon Torell, our old student?
Yeah.
Someone criticized him once and said, "Oh, all he does is blah, 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 it's shitty fencing." And you came on, you shut him down and said, "Or maybe he's just so fast that you don't see what he's doing." Yeah. And the other guy actually said, like, "Oh yeah, that's actually true. He's actually really, really good." Yeah. It was just an athletic ability that was just like not seen before when you start pushing that thing, doing physical fitness, training hard, have a proper regimen and all of that.
And I mean, regarding the physical training, we've spoken about this before as well. We saw it just changed when people got more fit. The way that they fenced was so. The reason people sucked when they were sparring or in tournaments that didn't look good was that they weren't fit enough to do the movements that they wanted to do.
Yeah. Some people took that too far. I remember this one guy who had been watching Victor Belfort work out. And when we were doing the circuit training after class, full HEMA gear on, because it makes it tougher. And then he'd watched Victor Belfort with a snorkel and eyeglasses. Yeah. Because, like, not the eyeglasses, but that was the only way you could put it on. So you had full combat gear or fencing gear, and then snorkel and eyeglasses going push-ups.
It's great for the lungs.
Yeah, and he did that once. Yeah. Like, if I do this once, I'm up there with Victor Belfort, and we're all good.
It's just enough to impress the boys.
But okay, so here's this may sound like harsh words, but also a bit kind words, I think. But Scott, I think that you're probably one of the most gifted natural fencers that I've ever met. You have natural understanding of fencing. You have a natural ability to fence really well. You have a natural ability of seeing a technique or fencing and then performing it. But you've squandered it by not training.
Yep. Yeah, would you want to comment on that? But then it goes back to the days of drinking, and it's like that's the price you pay, for a fun lifestyle like that. Other regrets, like I never won a tournament. That's like still one of those things that sort of like bugs me a bit. It's like, oh, fucking. But what do you say? Eat your vegetables, kids.
Do you remember? Because we talked about tournaments, and they were not all great in the beginning. Dijon 2009, we had an awesome road trip down. 17 hours in the car, and it was actually called Rent the Wreck, the place we got.
Yeah.
And I was sitting next to one of the doors that had a leak in it, so I got a cold air on my left knee for 17 hours. That was great prep. And we were both in the same tournament. How was that for
Oh,
you?
dude, what a nightmare, dude. So it's Dijon, great event. The tournament's great, but they had this thing because logistically they just they didn't have that much staff, so they were like. I don't know the reason for it, but the rule set was basically...
It was more realistic.
It was more realistic. So it was a duel, so it's like made to be like a duel. So first hit, you're dead. Like you're out of the tournament. So you spend 6 months at home training, preparing, like getting pumped, psyching up. And then I go up first bat in the pools, and I meet this... And to this day, I don't remember who this guy is, but it was from like the Fencers Guild of Chicago, something like this. Like, I don't know if he trains even anymore, because I'd love a rematch, buddy. And... he just does this like bullshitty swipe with the swords, taps me on my leg, and like, bam, I'm out. And then just the instant anticlimax of like, just pumping yourself up for 6 months and you get 30 seconds match time. I was like, fuck me.
Yeah, that was, we had a huge, a fight, and not fight, but we had an argument with the organizers there regarding that.
Yeah, there was an exchange. And that was just the first round. Like once you moved on from there, they actually did frequent modus fencing. You just fenced, and they were standing there going like, he's better, and he's better, like on some undefined overall judgment. But yeah, like if you had passed that one, you would have had some pretty awesome bouts. But like that thing, can you imagine? Like one motion, boom, and then you're out.
Yeah.
And then people still try to promote one-touch tournaments. Like
Yeah, and that's a reason, I don't think that will ever work, the one-touch, tournament. Because imagine you're a young fencer, you're from America somewhere and you want to travel, you're going to spend hundreds of euros on a plane ticket to potentially only get, 30 seconds match time. It's hard to motivate that, but if you get, there's something we always talked about in Swordfish, in organising the tournaments, it's like, well, everybody that fights are guaranteed a certain amount of minutes. So you kind of know that, because, even if you're like a pool guy that, you're never going to get it out of the pool, but, it's a place where you go and you sort of test yourself and you see, you can, in a tournament setting, you can evaluate where am I at? And so it's, it's important to let fencers have that. And I think that's like the strong, every like fencing culture geographically in the world have their strong point. And I think one of our strongest one, North Europe, is that we're like super organized, super organized, which helps us, we can create these sort of well-oiled, super organized events. We don't have the magnificent dinners like the French and the Italians do, but we, I think that's one of the strong points we have.
Oh, we did have a French cook last event.
That's right.
It.
Flory cooks. So we're up there. Yeah, Excel sheet fencing. It's actually a pretty strong point. But now it sounds like we became Puritans there around 2010, and I can't say that was the case. Do you remember Dijon 2011? Because we caused a lot of, we had a lot of fun that. Remember Mikael Widegren got in a fight with three jocks.
Oh yeah.
You locked Scott out on the balcony because he was so obnoxious and he was naked. And then you went to sleep or something and you just stood there smoking.
Yeah. I felt very continental naked on the balcony smoking a cigarette.
There was It was right over the train station. It was not like you were in a back alley or anywhere.
Massive dong hanging over the balcony.
And then we got out and we got plaster and there was a lot of hula baloo and you tricked everyone into believing that you'd seen Quasimodo on the church in the center of Dijon. It's like Hunchback. You missed him. Like you got like the whole crew to go for it. And we ended up at this French fencer's apartment. Brian.
I have no memory of this body.
And no, because that's somewhere like this party, a bunch of people there and it started to peter out. And the Hungarian guy, Török Peter, he was there. And we had a lot of fun with him. And then all of a sudden, Scott just goes, "Goodbye, chaps, I'm going on an adventure." Steals a hat and walks out the door. And we're never going to see him again. So I hang out with Török Peter and, our other friend who was there, he hooked up with this girl and thought, okay, man, it's time to leave. So we walked out, this is early, like 5, 6, 7 in the morning. This is like 9 hours after Scott just disappeared. And Török Peter, he's a special forces guy in Hungary, I think, or former. So he's interested. It's like, well, how does this man survive? Is he always like that? It's like, yeah, he's absolutely always like this. And we start talking, and then we find our way back to the hotel on the other side of Dijon. And just as I say, like, but you don't have to worry about Scott. Like, he always finds his way back. And then I hear, "Hello!" from the other side of the square, and it's Scott with a new hat. 2 baguettes and a bottle of wine and all the stores are closed. You've been out rumbling. You got arrested by the police for smoking drugs with hobos that night.
Oh, really?
And they took you, yeah. And then they let you go because you played dumb. And I know you speak French. But you managed to play the dumb tourist.
Yeah, probably.
And just
you can get away, if you wear a shirt and a tie, you get away with murder.
But it was like clockwork. Like, he always manages. And then there you were.
Yeah. I remember a time when also involving alcohol, when we're going to have a little bit more serious talk about the alcohol bit in a bit, I think. But we were at your place and we were going home, and on the way on the tram.
Oh, this one is great.
On the way home on the tram, there's an Italian guy.
No, he was Croatian.
No, okay. So here's the story. Now you shut up for a bit, or I'll mute you. But we come on the tram, and I'm fairly sober, but you're not. And this guy, you start talking to him, and what you think you're saying is, "Where are you from?" I'm from Italy. Oh, really? So why did you move to Sweden? It's such a horrible place with this weather. That's the conversation that you have in your head. The conversation that you're having with him is, "Where are you from?" "I'm from Italy." So did you avoid taxes? And he goes like, "What do you think all Italians are, like mobsters? You racist?" And then he starts, because he's also drunk. he wants to fight you, and I say like, you go over there and Scott, come and sit here. But he's so fumed up, so he's actually smoking a cigarette inside the tram, which you're not allowed to. But he comes up and he puts out his cigarette on the top of your head, and I stand up. And you stand up, and he says, "No, only one of you." And I've already pushed him away at this point once, so I say, "So Scott, do you want to take this one?" And you say, "Sure." And then you're trying to do, because you watch a lot of UFC, you want to do a specific technique that you've seen in UFC. So you're like waiting, and I'm coaching you. I'm going like, "Combinations, Scott. Combinations, goddammit." And this guy...
I remember the technique perfectly. It was in the height of John Jones, like right as he was rising as a star. And John Jones would do these like amazing spinning elbows. So it's like, okay, he's going to bum rush me, and then I'm just going to do like a pirouette spin, like a beautiful ballerina, and then just land my elbow right in his temple. It's going to be over. It's going to be brilliant. You know, of course, so he charges in, and of course I do my drunken spin, and then when I've got my back turned towards him, I just fly straight into the rafters, into the seats.
Like, I can tell you this: you both threw a lot of punches at each other, and none of them made contact.
Yeah, I think he hit me 400 times, and I didn't have a bruise. How is that possible?
No, because he didn't actually hit you. The tram was rocking back and forth, and you were like, and after a while, I was like, okay, so let's end this, right? And I broke you up, and we had a sit down. No, actually, there was this really, really big woman coming over and crying, and she was like, "Stop fighting, you two!" And I was like, "All right, so come and sit down here." And then the Italian guy, he's so agitated, so he gets pissed off at her, and he goes over and wants to beat up her boyfriend. But I overheard her saying that they were actually going to see her grandfather at the hospital as he was dying. So I was sort of feeling bad. So I walked over to this guy and I said, "Why don't you come over and sit with us, and you know, we'll talk it out. You can shake hands and everything." And he goes, "I'm not talking to him." And so I started talking to him instead, and his name was Francesco.
Francesco, the Croatian.
Oh, yes, the Croatian Francesco. And he was about hobbit-sized with hobbit belly. He wasn't very fit. He was
I think he was like 7 feet tall, no?
Right. No, he was a really small guy with a really big belly. He was skinny, super fat. And after a while, you get off because it was your place. But I hang out with Francesco, and he's suddenly my best friend. He said, "You've handled this very good. You're my best friend." I was like, "Take your hands out of your pockets, because I don't know what you've got in your pockets." And what he's actually looking for is a pen and paper to write down his phone number so I can call him. All right, I forgot the most important part, because the first thing that he did was actually saying to me, "I'm going to do a martial arts on you." And I was like not impressed, because he was this midget guy. And I was like, okay, so if you want to do martial arts on me, you're going to have to get off. He wanted to get off on that. You have to get off on the last tram stop, because we get off here, the next tram is in about 4 hours, and I'm not standing there with you after you beat me up for 4 hours. Like, that's going to be really awkward. So you'll have to wait until we get to the last stop, and then we can get off. And he was like, "Okay, but you know what martial arts means?" "I know what martial arts means." And then you got into the fight. So afterwards, we were best friends. He gets off, and I get off, and I'm cracking. I come home to Mia, and I'm just like, "I just got to tell you this story. It's fantastic." We got into a fight, and she was like, "What, is that a fantastic story, really?" I was like, "Yeah." And then I remember that there's a place called Bar Italia right where he got off. And my dream is that he's going to be there, Francesco, sitting, drinking a little coffee like Italians do on that place. And I'm going to go, "Hey, Francesco, I'm going to do a martial arts on you."
Fuck no, we should dojo rush the Italian cafe.
Absolutely. So that was it. But that, I think, was at the end of your drinking career, right?
I just remember I woke up 7 a.m. by a text message from Scott saying, "Don't believe anything Anders is saying. He was not Italian. He was a Serb, and he was huge." the end.
That's true.
No explanation.
That was the story of a lot of us hanging out a lot of the times that we were hanging out for a long time, getting quite drunk and having a lot of fun doing some crazy stuff and getting into fights and trying to steal things from Hell's Angels and stuff like that. But then you had enough.
Yeah. Well, exactly. There comes a point where, you know, like, you know, you go out drinking and it's, you know, you have all these fun adventures and it's, you know, it's a great time, but there's no body of work in there. There's no great achievement. It's just you're letting loose steam all the time. But where's the achievement in that? And you sort of realize that at some stage. And if you're young enough, you can stop and you can still go out and do stuff, you know, in life. So you know, that's pretty much pretty much what it came down to.
I remember you talking a lot about that because we used to work together at the shipyard. You know, as marine engineers.
Or
grease monkeys.
Grease monkeys.
Grease monkeys. But you became part owner. Because you did really well. And I went on with fencing. But you were always away. Like you were working long hours at these projects away from town. And then when you came home, like we went out drinking. I didn't see you at the hall, and you'd comment us like, "I can't do this. Like when I come home, I want to fence. I want to do things. You know." And it was just like from one day to the next.
You know, that's the shipyard lifestyle. You know, you'd just, you know, you'd work for 2 weeks, 2 months. You could work 100 days straight. And then you'd have 100 days off of drinking. And that's what everybody would do. You know, they're all old sailors. They don't have a lot of family. They just, you know, all these dockhands, they just sort of drink and smoke cigarettes. That was the life.
Yeah, there's definitely a lesson to be learned there. Moderation. But you went cold just.
Yeah, you never touched a drop since.
No, nothing. That was, you know, you get it out of your system and that's, you know, that's that.
Yeah, and you're not as funny, but I think that was worth it, actually.
Yeah, I think so too, eh? Yeah. It's, I don't know, there's no like deep, complicated truth or story behind it. It's just, you know, you realize one day, like, what the fuck am I doing? And you just, you know, sort of, you got to stop. It is weird though, when you like expect to die at the age of 30, like, oh, sweet. And then you don't, and you're like, oh, fuck, what do I do now? Like, oh, gotta get serious here. Yeah. It's like, you know.
You're a father now.
Yeah, got a dad, got a kid, 7-year-old daughter. Yeah. Killing it.
Really nice.
Yeah.
I want to talk about Swordfish.
Okay.
Yeah, and I want to talk about the live stream. That was.
Let's play some music first, and then.
Okay, I'll gather my thoughts.
Yeah.
I was just starting up, and you just cut me down.
Yeah, right after the break. Because first we have to listen to
something Italian, please, in memory of Francesco.
I can give you something Cuban, Havana Sunset. Serbian. I don't have any Serbian rap music, but I've got Havana Sunset with Metan Gov Ari.
Oh, that was beautiful pronunciation.
Thank you.
I apologize to all our Latino listeners out there.
Havana Sunset.
Are there any Cuban fencers? Any clubs in Havana? Tough question.
I don't know.
I mean, that would be ideal. If I'm going to retire, it's going to be running a fencing club in Havana.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
How would you say Axel in Cuban? Axel.
Don Axel.
Don Axel.
Don Axel. You actually have the Don on your locker. Doesn't it say
it says Don Axel on my locker.
Don Axel, yeah.
Good. Keep that up. So what I wanted to talk about was the Swordfish live streams. Because that's definitely one aspect where we changed historical fencing scene forever, basically. No one had ever done anything like that. You know, after every tournament, there was so much talk on the forums and increasingly also on Facebook. Like, what happened? You know, people, there was this fad of writing these long reviews, right, and so on. And we just had the opportunity. One of our members said, like, why don't we live stream this like a sports show? You know, Swordfish 2010, and 11 was the first time, right? Also, like the second year we did steel weapons. The first year we did steel weapons in all categories, and we thought that was a wonderful idea. Set up 1 or 2 cameras, and broadcast it to the HEMA community in a link, and it was such a success. And I mean, the fencing was what it was. I mean, there was some good fencing, was some bad fencing, but it was interesting. But people really got to see what happened at these tournaments, and that was also when Swordfish really took off as like not necessarily the event, but the tournament that you wanted to go to, and like how you matched yourself was how well you performed at Swordfish. Basically, that's where all the best people came, if they could, from all over the world, and that remained true for many, many, many years. But it wouldn't have happened. It wouldn't have become such a success unless we didn't have good commentators. And there were basically only 2 people in the world that was also on site, I suppose, who could be interesting and funny, and who had good chemistry. And that was you and me, Anders.
Yes, but we were already taken for other tasks.
We were actually competing, so it fell to Scott Hellroth and Matt Gallis to do that. And I gotta say, like, I remember walking up to you guys before the tournament when you were start prepping that thing, and you were already just so naturally, like, no one had ever done anything like this before. No one had any idea what it meant. And you were already going like camera angles, moving the audience a certain way, thinking like logistics and stuff. Like, you were so relaxed about it because you knew you both had like the ability to talk and comment immediately, and you also had this. You Matt have a really great chemistry. Why don't you talk us through that? You know,
well,
what happened?
You know, like, yeah, you have to get comfortable in that role. You know, it's a 5-hour broadcast, and you know, anyone who's held a wedding speech or something, it's, you know, it's like that's 3 minutes, you know, speech. So you sort of just have to get comfortable with it. The first couple of times are hard because, you know that awkward feeling you have when you're talking into an answering machine and there's nobody there to bounce off against. Yeah. It's that for 5 hours. So like talking into an answering machine for 5 hours, that's the equivalent of commentary. So, you know, we didn't know really what was going to happen with the live feed. You know, it became super popular among fencers. You know, like people traveled, you know, to Swordfish. It became it was the biggest tournament by far in the world in terms of, you know, and I think in a lot of terms, in terms of number of bouts, in terms of, you know, international opponents, you know, so you're meeting people from as wide a range of different skill sets as possible. So it really was the most competitive scene there was. And yeah, people traveled and for that opportunity to be on a live feed, you know, for whatever purposes they had for that, you know, why they would want to be on a live feed for themselves, or, you know. But for, you know, when you're organizing it, because, you know, I also organized the live feed and not only did the commentary, is that you put this question is put in front of you. It's like, what should HEMA look like? And that's something with sort of the first time we had the opportunity to, like, okay, well, what is the aesthetics of HEMA? And basically, like, there's something called mindscapes they talk about in the museum world, and a mindscape is if I say Greece to you, Anders, you think, what do you think about if I say the word Greece?
Ulysses.
Yeah. Well, most people would think about blue sea. Like, imagine a postcard. You have a postcard picture about Greece. It's white buildings, a blue sea, you know, that crystal blue sea, you know, that windmill, that famous windmill in Greece. Or if I say Texas to you, Axel, you have a mindscape of what Texas is. Everybody has an internal picture. So what is the internal picture of HEMA, and how do we materialize that? you've got to do as good as you can with what you have as well. You know, if we lived in a medieval town in Central Europe, you know, obviously the best place would be to have it in a square with the architecture in the background, and sort of you have these elements of history also with, you know, touches of modernity in the fences. But then, you know, if you're organising an event, that's something you have to think about, you know, and you know, that's what do you think about that? What's your...
Well, I remember this conversation back in the day because you talked about, is it tennis or is it football?
Or is it UFC?
Or is it UFC?
Which it was for when you started.
Yeah, so you were into UFC back then as well. But we was like, okay, so is it tennis? We're like, shh. You know, and it's all that, and ooh, in between sets.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, or is it football? Like, come on then! Oi!
Yeah. How do you want the crowd to react?
Yeah, how do you want them to behave, and what do you want the live feed to be? And the first time around that you did it, which year was this?
2011 was the first time.
Yeah. You did UFC. So you try to mimic or try to copy the style.
Well, yeah, I mean, in generally we had this, you know, we were a counter movement to soft HEMA. We wanted to be a tough martial arts. Yeah. We wanted to be, you know, breaking bones and getting out there. So that was the idea.
Literally breaking bones.
So the idea was, okay, let's have a rowdy show where it's sort of like, you know, people are screaming in the stands and it's like, you know, it's off to the races. But then, you know, you can't, you know, we discovered that that's forcing the narrative, you know, and eventually, you know, HEMA, it's class, you know, it's a slower sport with, like, it's slower, and then it has these impacts of explosion, so to say, and it's a bit more like tennis in that sense, you know, where you have, you know, and there's a gentleman aspect to it that, you know, you wouldn't have in ultimate fighting.
I agree with that, because to some extent we really had to try these different ways of doing it, because these discussions were important to have, and we made some changes, but to a large degree, just as you say, Scott, it plays out on its own. Because you walk in, there's an exchange. It's usually pretty tense. Nothing happens. People do get silent when that happens, you know, a lot of times. Then the exchange happens. Either nothing happens, you move out again, or there's a score, and then you walk back, and there's a few seconds break, and that has a momentum very similar to tennis. But we did do a bunch of things. You know, that it was you who said, no, the fences don't come out from opposing sides like in UFC, because that is an antagonist thing. They walk out one after the other, like in tennis, because they are now opponents, you know, but in a gentleman and ladylike fashion. Like these kind of things sets like a very different tone. But I want to ask you about that of the flow. That must be so difficult, because not only are there two of you who are commenting, you and Matt, you have two different roles. You're the young enthusiastic guy, you know, who's supposed to be like commenting as things are happening, which is super fast, much faster than you're able to speak, you know, see it, analyze, put it into words. And then you have the older guy who's supposed to give like, you know, thoughtful commentary in those tiny breaks, which both of you just overruled completely. And, you know, there was one year where you two didn't even hear each other, I think.
Oh, totally. And, you know, at some stages you're putting each other's hands over each other's mouths, like, no, I need to say this, you know, and it's, but then after a few years you sort of find a national rhythm. But I think the core of it is you've got to be passionate about fencing and what you're looking at.
Yeah, and understand it to a very, which is again coming back to what I said, that you're a very good natural fencer with a very, very good ability of reading fencing, eerily so. Like you understand fencing in a way, just naturally from. I don't know why that is, but I guess it has maybe to do with
my high IQ.
But maybe your 3-dimensional IQ. Yeah. Like I imagine you're probably a fairly good driver, for example, that you can sort of back up a car with a trailer into a narrow space.
I have another theory on why that is. You're such a romantic. I think that's why. Like you have such a way of thinking about fencing and drawing all these like references and impulses in your place. Like, yes, you are a rowdy UFC fan, and that played a big part of it. But you could also, I mean, do you remember when after the first live stream you said, now everyone can feel that they're a part of something. So I went, but it was true, and it was beautiful. And I mean, that's also, I think I often, you know, you, as we say, you can always tell a person's personality by his fencing style, right?
Yeah.
And one of the reasons I liked you before I got to know you was that I liked your fencing style because it was aesthetic.
Yeah.
And like it was purposely aesthetic, which also means that it's effective, right?
Yeah.
It can't be
Well, that's the hard thing. Is when you get, you know, messy fighters. And there's certain fights, it's just, you know, you're like, oh shit, this is going to be crap. And you're like, you know, because some guys, so they're very beautiful, they have very clear technique, and it's very sort of, you can crisply see what's going on. And others are just, you know, it's poke and hope, and it's just things are flying everywhere. You're like, how do I even describe what's going on in words? Like, this is just, this is a car crash. And and still, it's your promotion, so you got to promote it as well. You know, like, you know, make it sound better than it actually is. Another one is when, you know, and I've noticed this, you know, lately, is that fights they go into the same rhythm. And if the fencers don't have, you know, coaches that can help them get out of this rhythm, the fight just keeps doing the same pattern, it repeats itself for 2 rounds.
And we've all experienced that as fighters as well.
Yeah.
You get caught up in that and you can't break it. It happens to me all the time. Yeah. But I wanted to ask you this. So which is your favorite fight that you've seen in Swordfish that you've commented on? Which
like memorable moments?
I don't know if this was on the live feed though, but it was Michel Lopez versus the staff guy from Portugal.
Luis
Petro. Because this was
we've got that in the video though.
Yeah.
It's in one of the videos in promos. Yeah.
Oh, right, it is. And it was just because these are like, you know, Luis Petro was a staff guy, and, you know, and he was like a pretty, you know, legitimate martial artist, and Lopez is just this all-around badass. And you're like, and this was a sort of the HEMA's version of No Holds Boss. This is the first big tournament in 2011, and it was sort of like, you know, fencers were allowed to go after it. And we didn't know what was going to happen, you know, and fucking true to the bit, you know, Lopez opens with a spinning kick, you know, and it's off to the races. You know, some of the best fights aren't necessarily very good fights, but the hype towards what's going to happen when you put this guy and that guy together. You know, another favorite of mine was obviously Axel Peterson versus Jon Hodkiewicz. It's just like, you know, I can't remember the fight per se, but just the anticipation of what will happen when these two guys square off. You know, it's you know.
I can tell you for a fact though that you were not commenting on the Lopez and Luis Prieto match because you were the ref.
I was the ref.
You were actually hanging on Lopez's back trying to pull him off. Well, can I make a request? I have 2 fights I wanted to talk about, and I wanted to talk about it because you and Matt did a great job. And these fights were good, you know, but they're also intense. And like, I want to just hear your emotions and how you chose to talk about them. The first one is the final in 2011 in Longsword, because I met John in the semifinals and he beat me. And then he met Bate Hayford. Complete upset.
Yeah.
Do you remember the wrestling sequence?
No, I do not.
You don't remember that?
Go through it.
Yeah. So Jan hurt his hand against me, or so I think of someone before me, and like had to rest for several hours. So he was throwing a lot of one-handers.
All right. Yeah.
And Bert was like, I think he faced Carl Ruber in the semis. He just came out of nowhere. It was really interesting. So Jan was throwing these like one-handed strikers in, but Bert is a like hardcore Meyer guy, so he came up with a bunch of weird tricks that Jan was not prepared for.
Yeah.
And in one exchange, they get into a wrestling match, and Bert is like hanging on the back of Jan, end up there somehow. Jan takes him down, throws him over his own shoulder, and they roll, and the referee breaks the fight. And
early break?
Yeah, well, sort of. I mean, Jan's a very enthusiastic fighter, let's say.
Yeah.
And then he perceives that Bert is like taunting him, like by continuing to wrestle after the call of break. So he launches back in again, and Nathan Graparis has to choke him out almost, which he couldn't do, obviously.
Yeah.
John is a big guy. And you and Matt were just going wild because I see you in the background going like, wow.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
And like, Scott goes like, and it gets violent.
I love that.
But I'm going to give you another one. Because I know you know this one. And I'm going to embarrass because this one you fought Dennis for gold in 2015. And this is why you guys are so good. Because not only like do you have all these skills you and Matt, but you also are romantics and you know the community. Like you always know the people involved because you're involved. When in the last exchanges, when you think that Dennis has won, or that you think that Anders has won, but Anders denies the hit because he thought it was too light, giving Dennis another chance. Do you remember that?
Yes,
part?
I remember that.
Talk
clearly.
us through that.
Well,
one.
Yeah, exactly. So Anders had this stage in your you had this mental bug in your fencing career where many tournaments you'd I'd say choke in the finals. You know, you'd clearly be the better fencer, but you had this thing in your head where it's just like, okay, you know, something's going on, and you'd always get second place, silver. And then at some stage it's like, oh, do you know what? I don't care. And it clicked. And then you won when you did that. It's just a beautiful story. And so, you know, you're in this high stakes final, and, you know, Dennis lands the score, and he wins the whole, Anders lands the score, he wins the whole tournament. But he deems it himself an illegal blow, or, you know,
I thought it was too light. It just scraped the mask.
Yeah. So Anders called, what do you call it when you call the objection against yourself, basically, and they took the score back.
Yeah, protest.
Yeah, protest. And then it went on to sudden death, and you know, you won. And it was just the height of drama, really. You know, that was the suspense in that. But also, you know, like, display of fencing values. You know, like, do you want gold at every cost? No, thank you. I want gold at the right cost. Which was just like made it so much more sweet somehow.
To me, I mean, yeah, it sort of ties back into what we talked about, which style of fencing, like how we should talk about fencing. Like you said, there are UFC's sort of style of commenting is a bit contrived, and you naturally sort of drifted, or very awarely drifted, towards more of a tennis approach, I guess, to talking about it. And that's the same with a lot of things when it comes to historical fencing, that we're figuring out where the pieces fit, and they just fit perfectly there. So when it comes to values, I think sportsmanship, just that's the natural path for fencing to be like. We don't want it to be, I don't know how to say, like, but too ugly, in a sense, right? We want it to be, we want to uphold certain values and certain, like, honor certain traditions in a way, and not let it be.
Well, I think that's what brings us to fencing to start with. We're truth seekers, and we're people that want to find a way to walk through life with our back straight and winning at every cost. You know, that doesn't go hand in hand with that.
No,
you know.
Yeah, I think a lot of people love fencing because they get a chance to display those values. In your average life, you usually don't. You know, it's not like your workplace performance is based on if you can uphold your honor or not. Like, there's just no arena for it.
Yeah.
But to step up to fence, they want to give that point away.
Yeah.
You know, in a sense, they look for that opportunity. Yeah. And the sword is, of course, you know, such a powerful symbol for it, and they got everyone's eyes on it. The people like that just as much as they like, you know, winning or, you know, going for blows. Many of them do.
Yeah,
definitely.
There's a video that made a huge impression of me, which has nothing to do with fencing, but with bullfighting. Think of that as you may, but there was a horse called Merlin, or maybe the horse is still around, and they were showing in this video how that horse is riding sideways and backwards and spinning. It's just a marvelous beast. That animal is just beauty. It's perfected beauty. And there's the bull comes charging in, and the horse is going sideways and turning around and riding away in a different direction. And the rider just does this gesture. Like, there's such, like, Spanish pride in that whole, and I remember that
in complete control over his surrounding.
Complete control. The bull horns are inches away from the horse. Yeah. It's just a marvel to see. And I remember that Ivan, the Russian guy, what's his name? Novichenko. Like, he did the same sort of posture when he just stood up straight, and he just did like that when he won a bout, or when he saluted after winning, getting the medals. You know, there's panache. There's something there which just ties perfectly into fencing, and all of modernity, all of everything that we live in every day, all the sordidness, all of that stuff. You can just push that aside for a bit and be that romantic who can actually back up with a car and a trailer as well. You know, there's something there which is just comes natural in historical fencing, I think. Yeah, I don't know where I'm going with that, but
well, I can throw some sense in there because it's been a common argument that but you can't have a sport based on values or an art based on values. It's too abstract. Well, yeah, but we're not robots, you know. We don't fit completely into this kind of existence. I mean, that's modern workplaces. Modern day workplaces people are often like that. The people who work in offices and such. No one likes it. They don't like it in martial arts either. If you let people allow it and reward honor and panache and values, you know, they want to explore. This goes way back. How does the Iliad start? Sing muse of the rage of Achilles. It starts with emotion right away. Like that's the foundational documents for like European civilization in a sense, right? It starts with that stuff, and it's all about that. It just goes as a red thread, and we have an opportunity to do something with it. We absolutely should. And we just need to find, you know, in the moment a way of managing that. But if you like give a point away or something goes wrong in that moment, like, oh, you break a rule because you do this, okay, fine. But people are going to remember something much higher than that.
Yeah. Focus on the bigger story. I think that's
focus on the bigger story
because that's you know, in the end, that's what counts. No one's going to remember that judge's error when you lost that bout or whatever in the end.
Oh yes, I want to ask you about that, Scott. This is something you brought up. Now, one of my favorite moments of Swordfish is to watch Scott and Matt watch fights.
Okay.
Like two 5-year-olds.
Like two 5-year-olds, they're clutching to each other and they're biting their knuckles and then. But like in the time like between the pools when things are set up and the finals, which is later in Saturday evening when you step up on stage, you are free during the eliminations. Yeah, and you always say that like the elimination fights are more often some of the most beautiful ones.
The best. It is way better because it's I don't know why, but it is the best. The long sword. What do you call them? The elimination fights are the absolute pinnacle. I wished for years that we could have live streamed that because it's because you follow a narrative. I think that's the thing when you go in to see a live feed, you just see these two guys like, oh, these are the finalists, but you don't know what they had to overcome. But when you see a guy, he's like, okay, he's got to pass this boar first, and once he's passed this boar, he meets this Russian sniper who's just deadly, and he's like, okay, well, who's just good at jumping in and out and timing, and then he's like, okay, let me see what I've got in my tool bag for this guy. All right, pick him apart. And then here comes the third guy, you know, all-round veteran, like impossible to destroy, you know, and somehow he just finds a way to get through it and then goes into the final. It's like you see this sort of like almost insurmountable journey to the top, which is don't get to enjoy that. Plus we have front row seats because, you know, we just sit next to the mat and say we're doing commentary rehearsals, and then we just sit there and watch them. So it's the best time of my year is watching those fights.
Yeah. I think that when I enjoy live streams the most, not only yours but others too, is when the commentator is able to tell a story and combine it with enthusiastic.
Yeah, and I think
commentary. Like a drab commentary just takes the experience down, but good commentary like elevates the whole view into something completely different.
And any event, you know, that's the question you want to have. It's like, what are we trying to put forward? What is the story we are trying to tell here? You know, I know that, you know, there's been quite a few live feeds that come out and like, but what is the you need to ask yourself, what is the narrative here? What are we trying to push across, so to say? What is our vision of what HEMA can be? I think if you have an event and you have a live feed or you have, you know, any equivalent of that, you need a vision to sort of like, you know, this is what we want it to be, you know, and for us, I think it's been a lot of stages, you know, even in the early days. If we go back before live feeds and tournaments, we talked about modernity. You know, we were pushing modern approach to training and fencing, dressing modernly. And that was a big thing for you, Anders, was that because, you know, at that time we were so small and so fringe. We were standing next to reenactment, next to SCA, and whoever else it is. LARPers. And then if we start dressing like medieval monks, or knights, or, you know, finding some, you know, historical clothing that we could dress in, we'd sort of mingle in with that, and focus would go away from fencing more onto like, what were the shoes we were wearing in that. So we went with a strict, you could say more about that, but we went with a stricter modern look, but then trying like maybe at a later phase when HEMA is, you know, it's its own complete identity, everybody knows what it is, you know, it's a household name, then you can start playing with these historical influences. And if you look at, you know, so if you look at live feeds in different sports, how do they sort of present themselves? Like, there's right ways to do it and there's not so good ways to do it. So like, if you look at Karate World World Championships. You look at, you see this like modern sports arena, like it's a modern ring they're in, like it's got nothing historical about it. The judges are wearing like Anglo-Saxon clothes, shirt and tie, and the only thing that's historical there are the two geese, and there's nothing else there. So there's not a lot of identity tied into that. They haven't really nailed it, I'd say. But if you look at somebody who has nailed it, it's sumo. Well, if you go home now and you Google a sumo fight, you can see that every detail is thought through. The whole outside the ring, everything is completely modern. People are wearing suits and business ties and there's lights and everything. But then you go into this magical sphere that is the ring, and that becomes sort of this timeless historical sphere, if you want to say, where you see like the thought through sort of mannerism of the ref, the throwing. I think there's rice they throw or the dust they throw. Rice. Yeah, and the way the ref behaves in this very there's a lot of ritual almost in it. He sort of sinks down and he's shaking his arms and he's got this just awesome outfit that's just highly appropriate, and it really nailed it. You're like, oh wow, this is a sport or a martial art, if you want to call it that, with a clear, crisp identity, and it's fun to see. I don't think we're there yet as HEMA. We've come to the stage where we've got we had this stage where everybody just dressed in black, which is super hard when you're a sports commentator, when you're a fencing commentator. It's like, oh, black versus black. You can't tell one person from the other. But we'll see what the future provides.
Oh well, I have visions for that. I think all of us do. But I would say that
we have been able to do that in different settings. Sure, but maybe not in public and in a big setting.
Conspiratorial wink.
Yeah, but so I was just about to say that the whole idea that we wanted to move away from the SCA and all of that. That identity was that it already had an identity, but we always said that once we're established, then we can pick up on these things. You can have a parade into the tournament with people dressed like Landsknechts or with a Fechtbube in front and holding up a wreath and all of that with the musicians and everything. And we brought a few of those things, like the drummer in at Swordfish, and we had a little bit of a parade at least. So it's there, but you're absolutely right that we're not there completely. And one of the things are that these atrocious sporting halls that are just like
basketball hoops.
Yeah, and there's these ads, banners on the walls and all of that. So how do we create that sphere? Because there's a lot of effort that goes into the sumo ring in order to just get rid of the modern world and put people in that magical stage where this magic happens.
I don't know how many people noticed, but like the live stream 2014 is a lit hall with an old wrestling mat, yellow and red circles. The live stream from 2015 and onwards is the Saint Mark all white with a classical fencing logo with the heart and the sword and the wreath, and it's dark with spotlights on it. That was a pretty huge difference in atmosphere, I think, for the people there and for the fencers and also for the people who watch. I mean, small things can really do it, but you have to go out there and do it. Yeah. That's the thing. You have to have that vision. And I think many people didn't understand when we said, well, we're going to do this for a while, the sporting thing. Then when we're good enough, we're going to go back and do a bunch of traditional stuff. Yeah. And they were like, well, when can we do that? We're doing this. And I don't know, the commentator guy. And the answer is, well, you don't have to bother because you ain't going to do anything anyway. All you do is spend your time arguing on the internet. Like, it's going to be us who do this. Yeah. So why even bother?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing where does power and influence in HEMA, where does it lie? And, way back, it's only a couple of events, and it was more of a round table thing where, there's a lot of forums were the place, and there was, everybody's voice counted equally, and, people talked on the forums, and it was sort of not much happened. But then it sort of evolved into event holders, became the powerhouses of pushing, whatever narrative they had. But that's where the currency of HEMA lays, in the events, where you could push your narrative. I don't know if that is still the case, where the future will hold now with, social media.
I think that since social media has become so toxic, no one wants to really be around it, and definitely not engage in it in a way where you're relying on it or like engage in it too deeply, like you don't take it so seriously anymore. a lot of people are moving back to their own clubs, just organize their own club in a fashion that they like.
I think so too. I mean, you have much more of an island effect now. When we talk about those days when it was Swordfish, Long Point, Dijon, and like it was very few events, and not many of them cooperating much. We worked a lot with the Long Point guys for a while, but now you have like big things happening regionally. The need for the international cooperation is over. Why do you pay so much money to go to Swordfish for one tournament when you can stay in your home country and go to 4 tournaments? And that also means that the interest, for communication among event organizations and people who have actual things they want to do besides social media, actual things they can do, actual power, as you say, it's not the same as it was 5, 10, or 10 years ago more. I want to ask you though about like some of your own favorite fencing memories when you were sword in hand. It doesn't have to be a competition, but like, was it that time when your girlfriend called and you hit yourself in the head with a sharp sword?
I do Montante with a sharp sword, yeah.
And we're going back to the drunk stories now, I guess.
And he was so proud. He was like, I got a real sword scar.
Yeah,
like,
I know.
How did you get it? Like,
but that was always the thing with all this. You always saw these HEMA dudes with scars, and you're like, oh, where how did you acquire this specific scar? It's like, oh, well, I fell during the barbecue. Like, fuck, it's like, there's always, all these scars always have these like unromantic stories behind them. So yeah, that was a legitimate sword scar from Montante in the face.
Yeah. No, but something else, like something.
Dude, what a question! I don't, it's not the actual fights. It's the enthusiasm of exploring that, especially you and I had. When we were young guys and we were like just fired up with this passion, like we're going to this new undiscovered place. And I think the big one for us was going to Poland the first time.
2010, first steel tournament.
First steel tournament, and the Poles. And Eastern Europeans and Central Europeans, I'd say, have a different mindset towards fencing. When we went there, this one guy said this like thing. He's like, when you go to fence, you go to test yourself. I come to test you. I was like, oh Jesus, okay, all right, let's do it then.
I remember they duct taped the equipment to us, and we were going to our first steel tournament.
They were not impressed.
Gloves
and I had this gambus on with giant holes under the armpits, and they're like, well, it's your life, so good luck, buddy.
Good luck.
I got my ass completely handed to me, because that's the thing. When you go to a new place that has a different way of fencing, because any location they'll have these patterns of fencing. And if you go to a new place, you're experiencing a whole new like way to fence. You're most likely going to get your ass kicked, or the other way around. You're going to kick everybody's ass because they haven't encountered anything like you yet. And that is, it's going to be interesting to see, because when Axel, I'd say one of the reasons Axel got so successful as a fencer is that you traveled so much fencing, exposing yourself to so many different types of fencing. That's an interesting thing then. As you said, like if it's all becoming localized again, what will happen is that, you'll have it will be inbred fencing, in the sense that, you have a range of motions and techniques that are being used at each other. And then once the people that will travel, even if you don't have to travel because you have plenty of tournaments, they will absolutely prosper, because they're always putting themselves in new situations and having to adapt to those new situations. Does that make sense when I say that?
Yeah, it does. But I think that maybe it will never go back to being completely isolated again, because there's so many people fencing. So there will be more opportunities, but more opportunities closer to you.
Yeah, I mean, you might end up with like networks of clubs working together internationally, for example, rather than like this is the only one big thing.
Yeah,
who knows? Do you remember, like we went there and we. I taught on Saturday, and Anto Kurtovic taught on Saturday, like some other stuff. And then the tournament was on Sunday. And on Saturday, the Poles took us and the Slovaks out drinking or in the hotel.
Yeah.
And we're like, but we have competition tomorrow. I was like, don't worry, this is Poland. Everyone drinks, To have two fingers of vodka, that's it. You don't have to drink more. Yeah. It's like, and we didn't want to, disappoint the hosts. Yeah. We was happy to be invited. It was very exciting for us to do that. You're fighting new guys, new frontier, the Wild East.
Yeah.
So we stayed up drinking with them, us and the Slovaks. Eventually we get tired. And we're like, we can't do this. Oh, come on, it's a little bit more. And we realized that we are drinking with all the Poles who are not fighting tomorrow.
Exactly.
The ones who were fencing, they were sleeping. And they took us out for rounds.
And actually, used to say one of those things is that you can always tell what country you've been fighting in, depending where your bruises are on your body. Like lower leg hits, that's like the pulse, you know, they get you in the legs. And you look at your legs like coming home, like they're just these blue blodges of death. You're like, oh God, you don't even look at yourself in the mirror.
Yeah, and we loved it, so we came back several times.
Yeah, such fun memories, like, yeah, for just that era. I don't know, but that was the first, you know, there were steel tournaments before the Polish, but they weren't like, the Poles were just, they fucking went after it. Like, it was on, you know. And in Germany, you know, they had a steel tournament in Germany, but it was sort of like, you know, super nervous referees, like, oh, break. You know, and in Poland it was still like, you know, they were fucking, like, there was some, like, men going after it there. Like,
one of the reasons for that, I think, is that a lot of people in some places are nervous about the format in itself, like fencing and violence and all of that. They're detached. The HEMA has suffered a bit from, in that regard, from having a lot of nerds and academics who aren't like that sort of measuring yourself against another man who's actually brutally coming after you, and you do the same towards him. In a lot of Western society, especially for the more nerdy academic types, that's not really home for them. That's not a comfort zone. So, and that's actually not saying, I'm not talking down about that, because going out and doing that still anyway is a big deal. But I think it also means that you're so outside of your comfort zone that you put up boundaries that you don't want to transgress too much at one certain, and then you get used to it, and then you push those boundaries anyway. But the Poles were maybe a bit more sort of in touch with their inner beasts.
Yeah, like tough guys, you know, fighting nation, the tough guys.
Yeah, fighting nation. I remember having that impression. And they also had the equipment. Steel faders, padded gambesons, and gloves that held up. That was a pretty big deal. You know, without good gloves, you couldn't do this. It was impossible.
I'd say in general, Eastern Europe and Central Europe, they've never had that identity problem that we had with, you know, mixing SCA or reenactment with HEMA. For them, they've got a different relationship to HEMA and SCA, you know, while we have a different relationship. You know, so, you know, they were closer to the gambesons, the protective gear. I mean, that's what Swordfish did essentially, is that we took all the best things we could find from, you know, other tournaments. You know, our rule sets we made up, but then like the flag system they came up with in Germany, it was a good idea. They started with judges, I think, with shirts.
It was 2008 World One Open Championship, the first one with Steel, the one you're talking about. Matt Gallis and Scott Brown were involved in that, and some of the German guys. And that was like the one time they did it, and then we took that and ran with it. The shirts and ties we did.
Yeah. Oh, we did.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
And like do like just simple things like gear check before the pools, like organizing, rotating the judges, all those things. Just something you work up. We also took the best fighters. I mean, people wanted to go to Swordfish. You got the best Dutch, the best Americans, the best Russians, the best Poles, the best this, the best that. Or we hope. Yeah. I mean, because they wanted to go. They wanted to be on the live stream. They wanted to hear Scott and Matt go, I mean, thrust to the face.
It was, you know, that was the earliest were more fun because there were so many matchups that hadn't happened. But, you know, 6 years down the line, it's like, okay, well, we've got Axel Peterson versus Dennis Ljungqvist, number 7. You know, it's like, you know,
what, you're like, not impressed?
It's like, you know, there's not that sense that, you know, like, okay, what the hell is going to happen here? You know, when you have two like big names where you're like, oh shit, what is going to happen? Anton Kotovic versus some guy he was fencing. It was it Jan? I can't remember.
Szymon Stubowski.
Yes. Yeah. And it was like just so much anticipation. Like, what is going to happen? It's just electricity in the room. It's just like,
Yeah, but I mean, there's also something like you need someone to tell the stories about these fighters. You need someone to create the myth and keep the story alive. Yeah. And if everyone's watching the live stream, then the community has some sort of sense of that. Yeah. Right. And you have the commentators who can carry that on from year to year. Yeah. And you're creating a narrative for everybody. Yeah. And I think that was something that we managed to do consecutively for a few years that had a big impact. Yeah. Because then people like some Russian comes and he wins to Swordfish and it's super exciting. Everyone knows about him. Then he goes to Long Point. They already know his story now. Like they can relate to him more. It's more exciting that he's there. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah.
So Scott Hellroth, the storyteller of HEMA.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, I'll take that name. Yeah.
The Bard.
And Matt Gallis is the grandfather. What's it?
He's the great grandfather.
Oops. Oh man, we gotta get our. We're going to get spanked by that.
Putting him in the corner.
Godfather of HEMA. All right. So I think that this is the longest episode that we've ever done. So
really?
It's about time to round up.
I want to tell one last story because it relates to your ability to pull a narrative over a period of time. All right. And there was this one American instructor who we won't mention by name, but he had sort of the look of a mafioso, when he came over. And throughout the whole...
Are you talking about Tony?
I'm talking about Fat Tony.
Does it sound like Jocktown or...
Yeah, something like that.
Okay, yeah.
And so you nicknamed him Fat Tony, and you mocked him relentlessly throughout the whole weekend. And we knew him before. And and Scott has this ability to mock people until they like him. And it didn't really work with this guy, but you just keep on going and going and going, and eventually they just can't stop laughing, and then you got it, and it's fine. So you called him Fat Tony, for the whole event, and then
Fat Tony.
Hey, Fat Tony, and then we got drinking on Sunday, and we all go back to your apartment for an after party, and we all got into the elevator except for Fat Tony, who was just a little late. And we say, "Hey, come on, let's get over here," and he starts running. Scott goes, "Look, Fat Tony's running," and the guy goes, "Hey man, that's not funny. I'm not fat." And he steps into the elevator and beep, the weight limit alarm goes off. We all just collapse, dying. The timing was just brilliant.
Shout out to Fat Tony. He wasn't fat, by the way.
He wasn't. He was big bone. No. But it was just a perfect moment. And it really brings out your ability for storytelling, and then just timing, man.
Yeah.
It was beautiful.
Yeah. So before we hang up, because from the good old days, what do you guys miss? I don't know. Have you in previous episodes? Have you gone through this? Is it something you miss from the old eras, which is
Nah.
Nothing.
No, actually, I'm looking forward to the future.
The future.
We've got a lot of things going on, so yeah.
But that's a nice question for the next episode.
Yeah.
We'll bring you on again, and we can talk more about that.
Yeah.
Let's do that.
All right. Now we're waiting for Sam and Jonathan to come so we can start eating or drinking.
Yeah. Are you done with the cooking?
Just gonna get started, sir.
Okay.
I'm gonna crack into some non-alcoholic beers.
Yeah.
Be careful.
It was really, really nice to have you on the.
Yeah,
on
it was
show.
super fun, guys. It was professional setup here. We're in a full-blown studio and everything.
Yeah, except that the camera stopped working because we ran out of memory. But
we're too poor to get the proper equipment. But we got 3 microphones in the living room. That's not bad.
Yeah. No, we're setting up a new studio in my new place. So a bit. Okay, thank you guys for listening, and thank you, Scott, for joining us. And as always, a pleasure.
You are here on a matter of honor. I am here to assure you settle it honorably.
Junkerte Lehrer, Gottlieb haben, Frauen ja Herren, so wächst
I see you handle your weapon well.
I have been known to keep my tip up.
Morning.
Why don't you make it up like a couple of good fellows?
Don't expect these.
You ask for me tomorrow, and you shall find me a grave man.
You ready, gentlemen?